mind if I interweave a secret theme? Do you mind?
No, secret theme could take this to the next level.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not announcing the theme. It's a
Well,
secret theme.
but now people know that there is a secret theme because this is part of the recording.
Oh, we're on?
I
Okay.
think so.
Forget that I said that.
There's not a secret theme, everybody.
No. And, and if there is, you don't want to know.
Spoilers. These are way better openings than my last semester videos where it was just me talking to myself.
We'll see if we get any guesses on the secret theme. We'll have we'll have hands all over that, figuring it out. All right.
We're up to 543 views. We are unstoppable.
See, I don't see it yet.
It's not posted live yet for me either on my phone.
That might be us.
Oh, that is us. Probably talking about the secret theme. Oh, here goes the ad. Tonight's ad for me. Whoa, that's a cool ad. I don't know what they're selling me.
Is this your ad? Is this your ad?
It is. We got the same ad tonight.
Oh, sweet.
Aren't they the people that made the iPod Nano wristwatch band?
I don't know. Do you see my text? Am I in the right one?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't be in the right one.
No, you're in the right one. This is us. You're not wearing the goggles, so I know you're in the right one.
Yeah, but there's nobody. There's nobody in it.
Well,
oh, there's a bunch of viewers. Okay, I missed them.
Yeah,
I missed.
We got 5 already.
Okay, I'll turn you down.
Okay, I'm gonna turn that down too.
I don't know. Do you see? There we go.
There we go. Sweet. Okay, so tonight, everybody. Tonight is the most important night of the whole semester. I mean, at least that's from my perspective. Next week, Anthony may tell you that from his perspective. But tonight is the reason that I decided I wanted to teach web design. We're going to focus on a tool that is going to help you pick apart not just your own web design work and troubleshoot it, but any web page that you come across. I want you to be able to figure out, hey, how did they build that web page? That's the goal tonight. And that's the activity. And it's really the whole focus of the week. Let me pull up our Moodle page. Even better than that, I will pull up our task list. This week's theme is practice and the web inspector. In fact, I love the web inspector so much that not only is it tonight's live stream and the primary challenge, there's a second challenge, a follow-up challenge about the web inspector that you'll have to do on your own, preferably a couple days after you do this main web inspector challenge. This way you can have another time to try using the web inspector maybe on a different website or for a completely different purpose on a different computer in a different browser. Because as you're going to see tonight, we're going to focus mostly on the Chrome web inspector, but there's a web inspector built into Firefox and into Safari and into Microsoft Edge. So it's actually to your benefit to try to play around with a couple of them because you might decide that you like one better than another. I know that in Web 1, most of my students have typically preferred Chrome. In Web 2, this semester, I've decided to use Firefox as my web inspector most of the time because it has a few additional features that come in handy for some of the topics that we're working on in Web Design 2. All right, so, I mentioned the challenge and the follow-up challenge. There is also a web inspector journal where you'll be writing about your experiences with web inspector and telling us, what you think. And there is a CSS visualization challenge, which Anthony, I received quite a few questions about that already in Slack. And so I know that we have 1 or 2 students already that we're going to tune into the recording. They had specific questions about the visualization challenge. So if we have time at the end, we're going to pop open a couple slides and talk about CSS. But that'll be probably closer to 9 o'clock tonight than towards the beginning. Does that sound like a plan for you?
Yep. Won't go home without you.
Okay. All right. So let's close some of these tabs. The Web Inspector Challenge, from your perspective as a student, is a Google Doc that everyone can type in. It's kind of chaotic. This might be your first time typing in a Google Doc where everyone has been able to edit. You know what? That's not true. I think we had the dissection challenge, the URL dissection challenge in week 1 was one Google slide presentation that everyone could edit. And that one went pretty well. We didn't have anyone delete other students' work. So I think you're ready for today's activity. It's one Google Doc. There is a place for you to type in your name and fill in some information for each part of the activity. Now, I'm not going to be showing it on the screen here today. I took the same content, the same directions, and the same activity information and put it into this little slideshow just so that Anthony and I can show that larger without having to show anyone's names, because actually quite a few of you have already started the challenge, which is amazing. My goal tonight is, even if you've already started using the Web Inspector, to maybe fill in some of the gaps. I know that when I started using the Web Inspector, I kind of stayed in one area and I didn't stray too far from that. So hopefully if I give you a quick tour of how I use the Web Inspector, that'll open up some more avenues for you to play around with and be comfortable with all on your own. Anthony, you've done this challenge with me, I think, a couple times already. Do you find yourself playing around in the Web Inspector?
I do. I think after you see this, you're going to see a lot of purposes that you can apply this to. But one of the best is it's a great April Fool's gag here that you're going to be able to set up.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility, though. So, okay, let's get started in the Web Inspector. So there are 6 activities, I believe, that we're going to be going through. The first one is just about launching the Web Inspector. I'm going to show you Chrome, but I have instructions written out in the Google Doc if you want to use a different browser. Let me switch over to the web page that I'm going to be taking a look at today, and it's a page on the Mid-Michigan College website, a page that I helped create many years ago, and it tries to convey a lot of information all at once, a lot of links. It's very colorful. We're talking about new ways to make this page in the future, so this might look entirely different the next time I teach web design. But for now, this is the page that I want to showcase, and I want to show you how we built it with the Web Inspector. So the first activity has you launching the Web Inspector. There are 3 ways to do that. In fact, in technology, there's usually at least 3 ways to do anything. With the Web Inspector, I'm going to show you the longer ways first. And they deal with let's see, the file. Sorry, where'd it go? It moved on me. There's usually like a 3-dot menu, but it's moved in Chrome. So already I'm off script here.
That makes me sad.
It does. Okay, so it's underneath the View menu. Okay, so they got rid of the 3-dot menu in my version of Chrome. Maybe it's still there in yours. If you are using an older version of Chrome or maybe the PC version of Chrome, there's usually like 3 dots in the top right-hand corner, probably by your avatar. On my computer today, it's been moved underneath the View menu, and it's underneath the Developer menu, and you'll see that there's an option called Developer Tools. When you click on that, this is going to launch the Web Inspector, and mine is going to open up on the very bottom here by our floating heads. This interface has several tabs to it, and I'll explain what some of them do in just a minute. It also it probably by default appears on the bottom, I'm guessing, but you do not have to leave it at the bottom. Let me show you how you can move it around. Let me just show our faces for a minute here. The Web Inspector in the top right has that 3-dot menu that I referenced just a minute ago. It has a 3-dot menu. That may disappear in a couple weeks or months, who knows. But if you click on it, it'll tell you that you can change where it's docked. So you can actually choose maybe the right-hand side. If you have a widescreen computer, this view might work better for you, where you have the code on the right, a panel at the bottom that has CSS, and then the web page that you're viewing would be over here on the left, and you can still scroll through it. I find that this is great if you are working on a website and trying to make like a mobile phone view of a web page. If you wanted to shrink the size on the left and give more room to the code, there is a way for you to kind of like click in the middle here in the boundary. And my computer's having problems because we're doing the live stream tonight. But if you click and drag when your cursor turns into the arrows, you can actually make the code a bit wider and the web page narrower. That might be helpful. You can dock that on the left-hand side instead. You can also choose to explode it into a second window. It's called undocking it, but the icon to me looks like two windows that are kind of exploding on each other. If you pop it open, some people that I've worked with prefer this because they might have two computer screens and they'll have one with the code and one with the web page. I actually, for the activity tonight and in my normal day-to-day work, I prefer to have it docked at the bottom. I think that's because that was the only option so long ago. But this is where I keep the web inspector. Now, when you're done with it, you can close it with the X in the top right. And that is way one of launching the web inspector. The second method that I want to show you is actually hinted at if I go into the same menu. I went to View, Developer, and then before you click on Developer Tools, look on the right-hand side, and it has these squiggly characters and like a clover icon and then I. Do you know what those are, Anthony? You remember what those squiggles mean?
I'm on the delay here, so I'm not.
I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but in like on a Mac, if you're looking in a file menu, there's these little glyphs to the right-hand side, followed by letters next to a lot of the menu options. They're actually keyboard shortcuts, so they show you what keys to hold down. Now, you might look down at your keyboard and not see these little pictograms. They've slowly but surely been erasing them on my Mac keyboards. But on a Mac, I think the squiggly one is the Option key or the Alt key, and then that clover one, that icon is still on my keyboard. That's the Command key. So what this menu is saying is you can hold down Option, Command, and then I, and that is going to toggle the web inspector. I know a lot of people like keyboard shortcuts on the PC. It should be something similar. I think it's either like Control and Option and I, or they might even change it to J on the PC. I can't remember, but there is a keyboard shortcut that you can look up. And I find it handy for just opening and closing the web inspector really quickly because you can hit that keyboard command, the Command Option I, and close it pretty quickly as well. So if you can't find
real quick way to reach closure there.
Yeah, to get back to it. Especially if you have it open in two different windows, you might lose track of that window and want to close it, so that Command Option I is pretty handy. So the third way, I have to be honest, this is the way that I think a lot of you are going to prefer, is by right-clicking on anything on the web page. I'm going to right-click or control-click on a Mac even on the word current here. And in this menu, if you click on the word inspect, the web inspector is going to pop open at the bottom again, just like it did before, but it's going to do one additional step. It's going to kind of zoom into the code to what I had clicked. So in this case, this was actually an H2. And I know that because it opened all the code and it took me right to the words current students, and they are surrounded by these H2 tags. So if you think back to the first week when you were doing the view source activity, there's probably a lot of code that you were having to sift through to try to find anything that looked like something you were familiar with from the web page. With this inspect shortcut, you actually open the web inspector and can get exactly where you were looking at on the screen. And that works at the top of the page or the bottom of the page. You can actually leave the web inspector open and right click on something new and choose inspect, and it keeps the web inspector open. It just moves what you have selected inside of the web inspector. Now, as you move your cursor around in here, let me tell you what a few of these regions are that are on the page. Make this a little bit taller here. I have 7 or 8 tabs here. I have a tab called Elements. This is where you're going to spend 99% of your time day to day and even tonight. This is showing you the source code, and it's showing it to you in a specific way that we'll talk about in, I think, the next activity. The second tab is Console. This is useful if you're writing JavaScript code, and we'll take a peek at that at the end of the activity tonight. Sources is a really cool way to take a look at everything that was loaded on this web page. On the left-hand side, you can actually see all of the images and they're going to be organized by folder that they were downloaded from. All the images that are on this web page. And you can select any one of these to preview what that image was, or if you right click on it, I love this part, you can copy the link address to get the URL for that image, which is pretty handy when I'm trying to download a copy of an image. This works for more than just images as well. Somewhere in here, if I open up this application folder and I go to the theme folder, you'll see I can actually get to the CSS for this website too. So here's the mmcc.css style sheet file for the website, all by going through the sources tab. The network tab, I believe our author talked about in our book when we were talking about web performance. It doesn't have any information right now. It says that you have to reload the web page for it to start showing you information. So you can hit the little refresh icon with that tab open, and you'll see the red recording button here. It's going to make a little graph of how long it takes to load your web page and what the major parts of displaying this web page are. Now, we're not going to do a lot with this in Web 1. You might play around with this more in Web Design 2. I can tell you that my team at the college is using this quite a bit right now because we're on a mission to speed up how long it takes our web pages to load. At the very bottom of the screen, I hope it shows up in the recording, it'll tell you exactly how many requests, that's how many files or pieces of like images and files it had to download to show this web page. It tells you how much data was transferred and how long it took. This one web page, now I'm on a slow computer, took 10 seconds to load. This is heartbreaking here. We're trying to make our website a lot faster than that. And we're using this tool to kind of be our guide. The performance tab is a lot like the network tab. It allows you to see how many resources your web page is using. The memory tab is similar. I honestly don't use these tabs a lot currently. The application tab I use a lot more. If you've ever heard someone talk about cookies, this is how you can actually go take a look at the cookies that any website is using. So I can click on this URL over here and this one web page. These are all the cookies that our website loads when you're using our site. Oh, you had a question about cookies?
Yeah, just a little bit more. What benefit do those cookies do us?
Well, it's really one of only a few ways that a website has to save some information on your computer. The browser allows you to store just a little bit of data on a visitor's computer, and we use that to remember what user was last logged in. We might use that to temporarily store some data that's used on other web pages. Some of these cookies actually aren't even from Mid itself. Some of these might be from like our Facebook tracker pixel that we put on our website or our Google Analytics. In order for them to know what pages on the Mid website you've been on, they keep track of that in cookies. So if you ever get a message about too many cookies, you can go look at them here.
There's no such thing as too many cookies.
I wish that were the case for all of our websites, Anthony. Okay, so there's a security tab. We're going to talk about security towards the end of our class, like around week 15, and I'll talk about certificates at that point. But the Web Inspector can give you insight into certificates as well. Audits is a really cool tab that I'm honestly just digging into in the last year. We've been trying to improve our performance of our website. I mentioned that. And what's cool about this is you can actually run a test and tell Chrome to simulate a slow internet connection. And it will show you how long that 10 seconds I showed you actually takes on a slow phone with a slow connection. And it also has some built-in accessibility tests as well. So we talked about being friendly towards screen readers and providing alt text on images. Running an audit in Chrome is going to look at every image on the web page and look at other aspects of the page to make sure that you are following the best practices to make sure that your website works on a lot of devices and for a lot of different assistive technology. And then the last menu is WASP on here. This actually isn't something that you see on your computer. I actually installed a plugin in Chrome that lets me see what like ad networks and trackers are being added to a web page, and it's a WASP plugin for Chrome, and it actually adds something to the developer tools, which I think is pretty cool. So these are the main regions over here. If we go back to elements, this is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. And there are actually a couple regions I want to show you. The main code you've already looked at. Along the right-hand side is where we'll spend a lot of time taking a look at CSS. So that's a quick introduction to the Web Inspector. Your first challenge is to launch the Web Inspector on a web page of your own choosing. And what I wrote in the Google Doc was that this is the page I'm inspecting, and I added a link to the current students page. Make sure you're copying and pasting that URL, and after you paste it in, hit enter, and Google Docs will turn that into a clickable link so that other students can go look at the web pages that you inspected. So, do you have a preference for opening up the web inspector, Anthony?
You mean out of the? Well, I think we should probably talk about all the different ways because the I think keyboard shortcut's always good, but I like that little icon. I put it up at the uh, on the top bar.
Oh, you added a shortcut to it. Nice. And so, do you use Chrome or Safari or Firefox? May I ask?
Oh, you're in Chrome. I've been using Safari
No, that's
because
all
I
right.
because I could put that web inspector icon up there and just pop it up when I need it.
Yeah, I used to prefer Safari because it has some additional superpowers. And when we were in a lab environment, I would reserve the iPad cart so that students could actually plug in an iPad. And there's a way to use the web inspector in Safari to look at web pages that you're looking at on your iPad, which is pretty cool. Um, and
Well,
then,
that's
like I said, this semester we're using Firefox in Web Design 2, which has been pretty fun. It has a really cool way to look at grids on a web page. All right. Do we have any questions in the chat room, Anthony? Or do you think we should move on to activity two?
so far we don't.
Okay. All right. Activity two. Now that you know how to launch the web inspector, you need to actually figure out how to use it for some good. And I have found that the web inspector brings a concept to life for me that I barely could even understand in my head before. And that's the DOM, the document object model. I'm going to read to you a description from Wikipedia, Anthony, and you tell me if this makes sense to you. The document object model, the DOM, is a cross-platform and language-independent convention for representing and interacting with objects in HTML and XML documents. The nodes of every document are organized in a tree structure called the DOM tree. Objects in the DOM tree may be addressed and manipulated by using methods on the objects. The public interface of a DOM is specified in its API. Does that make a lot of sense?
It it makes me wonder. But,
Yeah, it makes me wonder too. I don't know how many people contributed the words to that definition, but there's a lot of them in there. I like to think of the web inspector as one of the word, or sorry, the DOM as one word in here. Tree. It's a tree. And if you think back to how in one of our lectures we talked about how you had to open and close your tags in the right order, our author actually had this little diagram that showed the HTML tag, and then underneath that it branched out into the head and the body tags. That's what the DOM is. It's the relationship between all of these tags that we write. And the web inspector will help you prove that you've written those correctly. So let's bring the DOM to life inside the web inspector. I'm going to close everything up here. I'm going to just open up the web inspector, and you'll see that what it's showing me at the very top is just this HTML tag. And when I hover over it, my whole web page turns blue because Chrome actually highlights on the web page exactly what it is that you have selected or you're hovering over. So I'm hovering over the entire HTML web page. If I hover over the head, you'll see that, like I've been trying to say, the head is this invisible metadata about the web page. These tags are underneath the HTML tag, both the head and the body. If I move over the body, that highlights the whole web page, as you might expect. But I can actually explore the DOM. The DOM is this living, breathing set of tags, and I can go exploring. I can open up the body, and now I see all the next level tags, the next level children. And I can get down to this other div and open it up, and I finally start seeing some interesting content. I see a nav, I see a logo, and as I hover over each one of these... Oh, can you still hear me, Anthony?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I hover over each one of these, my computer's going crazy. Let's try this again. thought I had fixed our streaming problems, Anthony. All right, so if I hover over each one of these items, you'll see them get
Right.
color coded up at the top. This is the DOM that we're exploring. It all starts with one tag, the HTML tag, but it goes pretty deep. It shows tags within tags. Now, the power of the web inspector, the reason I'm so fond of it, is it allows you to get really deep by just right clicking on one element, and it will move you into the DOM to that specific child. How do you know what that child's parents are? Well, you can start looking upward. You can see that this H2, the current student's H2, is underneath a div. And if I select it, it gets color coded in blue. And if you look pretty closely, you'll see that it actually says div.content followed by some numbers. The web inspector actually tries to tell you the name of the tag and any classes or IDs that are on it, followed by the dimensions of it. So that 224 is how many pixels wide the current student's box is. If I look at the parent of this tag, the grandparent of the H2, I'll see a div that has a couple of classes. It has a class of tile, a class of white, and a class of intro. And I just follow this all the way up. So this has a parent of a section tag, which has a parent that's another div. It's divs all the way up, it looks like. And rather than have to go up one by one, I can actually look at the very bottom bar here in Chrome, and it gives me a breadcrumb trail. So here's the H2 that I had originally selected right here. And if I follow it up and hover over each one of these, it kind of refreshes what my selection is going all the way up. And if I go to this ellipsis over here, it allows me to scroll over and see all the other tags all the way up to the HTML tag, which, like I said, includes everything. So how did the web inspector bring the DOM to life? Well, it allows you actually to see that relationship by folding and unfolding each of those tags to see their children. And I think I used some language that I hope is pretty intuitive. I called some of the tags children. I called some of the tags parents. Is it clear how those relate to each other, Anthony?
Uh, I think so, but if not, go ahead and comment if you have any questions about that. We talked about the parent-child relationship before, and this is very similar.
Can I throw a wild question at you? See if you can see where I'm going. If a tag like the UL tag, the unordered list tag,
Hmm.
had multiple children, it had LIs in it, an LI for the first bulleted item and LI for the second. How
Hmm.
would you describe the relationship between those LI tags? What word?
Um, I I think we would call them siblings.
Yeah, see? We're just using words that we've used for other things in the world and applying them to code now. But that's why these opening and closing tags have a specific order, because if you're writing them out of order of how you open and close them, you're really not accurately describing the relationship that you want the browser to depict when it renders the page. I showed you how in the web inspector, if you hover over or you select an item in the DOM, it gets highlighted on the web page. I showed you how to right click and jump right to something in the DOM by choosing that inspect option. I did not show you, but I will now, how you can search the DOM. So if you're in the web inspector and you're on a Mac, you can hit a keyboard shortcut, Command F, and it brings up a bar at the very bottom that says find by string, selector, or XPath. If you are on Safari or Firefox, it's probably going to say something different, but on a PC, it would be Control F. You bring up the search interface, and you can actually search for current students, and it's going to start highlighting what it finds. And the first occurrence of it was in the title tag. My face is blocking the result. Let's switch over. Okay, I've hidden our picture. You'll see that there's actually 3 search results for this, and I can use the arrows to go through them. The word current students also appears in a link up at the top of the web page. And finally, inside of this H2. You can search for any word you want. You can also search for tags, and it usually picks up where you left off. So if I search for a div, actually, this jumped all the way back up to the top of the page. It found the first div. You could search by class. So I know that there was a class called tile. Actually, there's a couple references to tiles and tiles in here, and I can just keep hitting enter to find the next one until I get to where I want to be. So there's that first cyan tile. So these keyboard shortcuts that you might use in Atom also work inside of the web inspector, which is pretty handy. And most importantly for the next exercise here is you can see that breadcrumb trail to get from the element that you've selected all the way back up to the HTML tag that contains the whole web page. There's one other thing I should show you, and I hope this keeps working in Chrome and Safari because I think it's just kind of fun. Any DOM element that you have selected, let me shrink this down a little bit. I'm going to close my find. Anything that I have selected, I can actually just hit the H key on my keyboard, and it temporarily adds a class to it that makes the content invisible inside of it. So if I hit H again, it removes the class, and it appears on the web page again. I use this a lot when I'm trying to figure out if I've selected the right element, because things are inside of each other. You might select like this outside parent and not have selected just the inner child that you really were interested in. So anything that you click on, even this whole containing block, you can hide, and the web page is probably going to look a lot different without its content. But I find that extremely cool to troubleshoot where I'm at in the DOM. Okay, so what's your challenge here? In the Google Doc, I want you to describe what the major sections or the top level divisions are of the web page that you're inspecting. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go up to the HTML tag again, and I'm going to tell it to close or collapse all children. When I get a URL, let's say I'm working with someone at the college, and they want to make a website that looks like this other cool web page that they found. The first thing that I need to figure out how to do is write the HTML needed to start building maybe the nav bar, maybe it's a photo or like a gallery. I need to see how that HTML is structured. So the first thing that I need to do is get familiar with the web page. So I like to look at web pages two different ways in the web inspector. One is getting like a high level, breadth level indication of the major regions of the web page. So if I'm thinking breadth first, I want to know what the major regions are. That's where I'll start opening up the body tag. And I'll see by running my cursor down, where is most of the content? Well, if I hover over this one div on this web page that I'm looking at, there is a single div, and it doesn't matter where I'm scrolled to on the page, that contains all the page content. If someone was asking me to recreate this web page, I'm not going to be able to do it by just writing one div, right? So I'll then open up that level to get a little bit deeper till I start seeing major regions of the web page. So underneath this one div, you'll see that suddenly there's this nav bar, and it gets highlighted and blue up at the top. And then underneath that, there's this logo bar, and you'll see that highlighted up at the top. And then there's this HTML block, which looks to be another nav bar. And then a section that doesn't have any content that's labeled above, and then a div called main content, and that appears to be where all these wonderful links in the various colors are. So as I'm trying to understand this web page, I can now tell that I have a nav bar up at the top, I've got a logo bar, I've got another nav bar, and then I have this section or this div called main content, and that's where everything is. That's what I'm asking you to do. Look at the web page that you chose. Hopefully it's one that you're familiar with, and try to figure out what the major regions are. It's not enough to say that it's all in the body tag or that it's all in a div. That doesn't help any of us, right? I would like you to be able to say at a broad level, what are the major regions of the web page? So that is the first part of this second activity. What are those major sections or the divs of the web page that you're inspecting, and list those. So let me pull up my answer for that. So in my example, the page's content is separated into the following main areas: elements, tags. I wrote nav, header, nav, div for the main content, div for the footer, and then a link to the top. And I think I just did that for you by looking at that web page again. The second half of this is to go depth first. Dive deep into the DOM, because if you want to know how to build a nav bar, it's probably going to be worthwhile to look at a single link in that nav bar to figure out how it works. So for my example, I'm going to choose one of the links that's buried deep in here underneath the LLS. I'm going to right click on this Math Lab link. I'm going to choose inspect. And that zoomed me in really deep into the DOM. I'm on an anchor tag, so that's the link, and it says Math Lab. That's good. How many tags? How many links did it take to get to the center of this web page? Well, to get to this point, I want you to look at that breadcrumb bar down at the bottom and describe all the tags it takes for you to get to the link that you selected. Now, as far as I know, there's no way to copy and paste this. You have to actually type it all in. And I commonly get questions about what are the pound sign and what are the periods. I'm hoping that this week's CSS chapter has introduced you to those concepts already. When you're writing selectors, that pound sign represents the ID attribute and the period represents the class. So if I go up to this div here, this div has a class of hidden content and eggplant and pop left. And if I hover over that, you see those periods in the description above what I've been hovering over. So Anthony, I think this is probably the trickiest lesson because I'm asking you to kind of do two different views of a web page. Can you see how it would be valuable to get a feel for all the major regions, but then also know how to get deep into the element that you're interested in?
Very, very versatile to be able to do those two things.
What web page are you looking at for this? Are you following along with the current students page too?
Yes.
Is there anything in that code that's standing out to you that I should comment on with the classes or IDs or the types of tags I'm using?
Well, maybe just use one example and that we can see what the code is doing, both in the code and on the page.
Do you have one in mind?
I have to wait till the delay comes to see where your cursor's at, but is it too premature to show a change on something? So
yeah, that's the next one. We'll be there in a second. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll be good. Good. I'm glad we're going in the right direction. Are there any questions in the chat about what this activity asks you to do?
Are people in the chat following along on this page? Okay.
And maybe in 2 minutes we'll get an answer.
Yeah. Hands all over this.
All right, well, I'm going to move on to activity 3. If a question comes in, we can move back. So the web inspector, if it just did that alone, that's enough to help me with most of the work that I do, honestly. Most of the time I'm just trying to answer the question, how does this thing work? And the first thing they need to do is look at the HTML. And it's better to see that as the DOM visualized. But the web inspector is way cooler than that. Not only can you see it, you can edit it, you can change it. This is where the April Fool's Day jokes come in. This is where the responsibility comes in because you can change any aspect of this web page. Now, I typically do that if someone asks me, hey, can we change the word current students to also say that it's for alumni? So maybe we want to add the words and alumni. And you'll see that, hey, that web page actually looks like it could fit it. What if we didn't want to call them alumni? What if it was actually for future students? I can actually just double click in here and change the content. And this is where suddenly, yeah, that breaks. That breaks badly. So I don't think we can fit that many words into the design very easily, not without some major reworking. So maybe let's put that back to current students. You can actually just double click on anything in the web inspector over here and type into it. So if I'm double clicking on the words current students, that's letting me edit the text content. If I double click on a tag name, I can change that tag name. So if I want to see what this looks like with an H3, that changes both ends of the tag to an H3. And that doesn't work either. That suddenly became invisible. It looks like it might be white text or something. Yeah, it changed it to white and really tiny. I must have written some CSS that makes the H3 a lot smaller. So let's put that back to the H2 because I think that would be better. I can also change any attribute. So this is where I like to start messing with these tiles that we have here. If I inspect this advising and mentoring tile, you'll see that I have a class on here that says tile and then a class that suspiciously looks like the name of a color. And I happen to remember what these classes are. I know we have cyan, and I know that one of my favorites is eggplant. That's what we use for the LLS tile. So I can change the class name, and then it picks up all different colors just from that. So I'm editing all aspects of the DOM here. The text content, the tags, the attributes. I can delete. So maybe we've decided we're going to move some stuff around. Let's get rid of this button in here. This is actually a relatively new button. It doesn't look like it fits there, so I'm just going to delete it.
Whoa.
Now I can see what this page looks like without that. I can actually delete any group of tags that I want. I can actually go and delete this entire tile, and you'll see that the design tries to shift around, but very quickly you'll see that certain things expand over to the wrong side.
Okay, I don't want to know. You're freaking me out. It's getting harder to breathe here. Are you messing up the website right now? What's
It sure
going
looks
on?
like I am, right? I could take a picture of this and send it to someone and freak them out. Like, hey, did you know that our webpage is broken? Or, yeah, imagine the pranks you could pull with this. But the truth is, I am not editing midmich.edu/audiences/current students. If you go to that webpage, Anthony, you'll see the button. You'll see
Oh,
the LLS. You'll see the things that I deleted.
still there.
And in fact, if I click refresh, I think all my changes go away. Yeah, the button came back. The tile that I deleted is there, the advising and mentoring tile. Everything came back.
So
So,
when you're making those changes, you're making changes to the file and the cache,
yeah,
and you're
remember how the client server interaction goes? Your browser is a client. You're asking the server, "Can I get a copy of the current student's webpage?" And it sends it to you. What it's giving you is not the only copy of it, right? We have thousands of people visiting it all the time. Well, maybe not this page, but all the pages of our site. So it's sending me a copy of what I need to see the web page. Your browser has let the web inspector change that copy that you downloaded. It lets you change the copy of the DOM that it knows about that is displaying on the web page, and as you make changes to it, it shows you what those changes would look like. It's really great for prototyping and tinkering. And it's safe because as soon as someone else asks for the web page or you refresh, you get a brand new copy of it, and all your changes are safely removed.
okay. That's good.
Now, you do raise a
Avoid
good question, though.
misery.
Maybe you do want this change to be saved. You could actually copy and paste the code out of here. And there's a couple ways to do that. It's been changing. It's slowly evolved. But I think if you right-click, there's a way to go down to copy. And instead of copying just one element, you can actually say copy the outer HTML. And if I switch over, do I have a copy of Atom running? I do. Come on, Adam, you can open. It's going. So now if I paste, it actually copied all the code surrounding what I had selected. It's not getting me the whole HTML file because that's not as helpful, but it's getting me just the part that I had selected so you could copy your changes and save that. You could use this to copy someone's navbar and then change the HTML yourself. In fact, I have many students that will take a navbar and just kind of change it to have the content of their navbar on someone else's web page, and then they will copy that into their document when they're done. It's pretty powerful.
Wow. So help me out a little bit. How often are you using this when you're working on the site, using this inspector?
Multiple times a day.
Okay.
I think I used it dozens of times today on a new front page that we're building.
Do you use this tool to figure out how certain things are done on other websites that you see? Is this your go-to method of looking at the code, or do you use another method to try to figure out what styles and code choices people are making when you see something that you find interesting?
This is my go-to way. I've used the web inspector for some crazy stuff. Usually, it's learning how something was put together and pushing it to its edges. Like if someone said we want to have a nav bar like this and we want these links to be in it, like I'll pick up on right away that our links that we want to put in something are like too big or too long and they don't fit, and I can show that to them just by editing the nav bar in its place, and that strikes up a better discussion of, okay, maybe this isn't the type of format we want. Let's go find something more like this.
So this is a really good tool for interacting with clients and uh, trying to um, verify that your choices are in alignment with the client's choice,
Yeah, and
showing them.
if you say the word client, I have used this when I'm previewing something that I've built, and they're telling me like, "Oh, can you make this bigger? Can you do this? Can you?" And then I can actually just make those changes live. I haven't actually made them permanent, but we can kind of guess at what tweaks are going to be necessary to make it match what the client wanted.
And then you generally copy that code out if you've made a decision to keep something that you've changed using the inspector, or do you just make some kind of note to make that change in the original code?
It's embarrassing. I've forgotten that I can copy out of it a lot of times. So hopefully all the people that are learning about it for the first time today will know, oh, I can copy that out. This guy who didn't have the ability to copy anything just closes it and tries to remember everything he changed. It's more practice. I can rechange it again later when I'm back at my desk.
It was always you, dude.
All right. The other thing that I have used the web inspector for um, is something on a website where something was broken. Let's say something annoying popped up on top of the page and I can't select the thing that I want to look at anymore. This little experience of selecting something and hiding it or even deleting it allows you to get rid of things that pop up over top of the web page you're looking at. I'm just going to lay that out there. This is for better or for worse. I've been like on a banking website and it tried to like pop up a message to hide something underneath it, and I just removed the thing that was on top. Um, there's so many creative ways that you can use the web inspector to help you. And you can do some mean things with it too. I would never do this, but if you ever see like a tweet, a screenshot of a tweet, and you wonder how could someone say something like that, put a little, just a little thing in your mind now can envision someone open up the web inspector on a tweet and changing it to say something else, maybe removing a word, maybe adding a word, maybe doing something more dramatic than that. But I need everyone here who's watching this to promise to only use this for good, for educational purposes at least.
Which is what you always do. You always use this for good.
Always.
This is the man who never lied right here, for sure.
So your challenge now is to go and try editing, deleting, and adding to the DOM. If you want to add HTML, that's the one thing that's a bit trickier nowadays. If I try to just add in some tags, like I'm going to add the strong tag around here. If I hit enter, you'll see that the word or the tag strong appears as actual greater than and less than signs. They're assuming that when you are typing into the text area that you want the less than and greater than sign. That is never what I want personally. So if I right click, instead of editing text, I can edit as HTML. And this might be subtly different in Firefox and Safari, but in Chrome at least, you edit as HTML, and then what you're actually editing is the whole HTML tag. So let me get rid of the less than signs and greater than signs that it put in as special entities. And let's actually type the word strong with tags right now. And then I think you hit enter. Nope. Command enter. And now you'll see that the word students is a little bit bolder. Now on a PC, you might not have command. It might be control enter, or maybe you can just click away. Getting out of that edit mode might be a little tricky, but if you want to add additional tags, nothing is stopping you from doing that either. All right, so that is activity 3. Any questions from our friends in the chat room?
Not yet.
Okay. I did get a message from someone privately that the video was pretty choppy again.
I've noticed some chop. I'm able to follow all the. You've left enough time on the code that I think we can see all that. But if I'm wrong, and somebody else noticed something, or notices something as we proceed, make sure you say something, and then we can demo it again.
Yeah. It might be my internet connection tonight, but I noticed that your video dropped out once on me too. Just watching it from this end. So apologies, everyone. The good news is if something did get cut off, we've already posted the video from last semester where I demoed this alone. So if something's unclear, there's a whole nother video where you could jump ahead to the section and watch it there as well. All right, so what did I do when I did this? Well, I actually removed some of the empty tiles. I changed the heading in a tile. I practiced adding a new link. Oh, that's something that I've done with this webpage before. Is someone will say, can we add a link to this tile over here? And I'll just really quickly mock up what it would look like so that we can see if it fits. All right, ready for some CSS, Anthony?
Yeah.
CSS is what we've been introducing, quite recently here. In the middle of our polar vortex. CSS can be confusing. You can write CSS that does absolutely nothing to your content on the web page. If you write the selector just a little bit wrong, if you use an ID instead of a class, or you use the wrong tag name, or things are nested differently than you're expecting, you will write accurate CSS that passes the validator, that shows up color-coded right in Atom, and you're going to be pulling your hair out like, why is it not red? Why is it not bordered? What's going on? And the web inspector is your gateway to troubleshooting all of those problems. The C in the cascading style sheets stands for cascading, and it's really hard to understand all the rules, but you can see the results of all those rules in the web inspector. So let's bring your attention to the right hand side here, and I have to hide our pictures again, Anthony. Hold on.
It's okay.
We're still here. You can't see us, but we're still here. Okay, so I want to show you several aspects of CSS here. And I'm going to start by just looking at this current students again. Oh, you know what? This is my edited copy. Let's refresh the page. Get a fresh copy. And then I'm going to inspect current students. I'm going to make this right-hand panel just a little bit bigger. This right-hand panel says styles, but it also has tabs for computed, event listeners, a few other things. The two tabs that matter the most are styles and computed. Send us a message in the chat room if those aren't showing up. I know in Safari they're hidden by default and you have to hit an icon to get them to appear, but I think by default in Chrome they show up. So what is being listed over here is the cascade. These are all the styles that have been written by the web designers that are affecting what I have selected over here on the H2. If I select something different, if I select this div, the content on the right changes. So this is a real-time look at all of the CSS, and this could come from a lot of different places. From the CSS 3 Ways Challenge, you can add them from an external style sheet, or from an embedded style sheet, or an inline style attribute. It doesn't matter where the CSS comes from. It doesn't matter how many different style sheets you have on your web page. The browser is going to show you in the web inspector everything that is vying for contention to win out, to style this H2 current students. And so as I scroll down here, each one of these blocks is a CSS rule that has been written. What you see first is the selector. So these are selectors I wrote several years ago. And then inside the curly braces are the properties, the declarations that are the properties we're changing. So this H2 has its font weight set to 400, and the font size is set to 42 pixels. If I scroll down further, you'll see that there's a different CSS selector that was written where it adds this class of white, and when this class, or this selector, has an H2 inside of it, we've written a selector that will try to change the color of the H2 to this almost black color. If I scroll down further, you'll see that there's rules that have been written with media queries, which means that they only take effect when certain conditions are true. And so when the screen is a minimum width of 768 pixels, the padding and the margin have been changed to 0. If I keep scrolling down, you'll see that there's a lot of different CSS rules that I wrote that are taking effect. Eventually, I'll get down to some that have this line or the cross through it. And what I think is very interesting about this is someone wrote this. Brandon wrote that he wanted padding of 10 pixels, but it has a line through it. Can you guess what that means, Anthony?
uh, I'm waiting for the delay, but I'm guessing that the line. What would you say it was 10?
Yeah, the padding was 10 pixels in this line, but it has a cross through it.
And that means something else is overriding it in
Yeah,
the
you
in
can
the
write.
styles.
Remember when we wrote about like Team Red, Team Blue, and Team Green? We had a
Hmm.
bunch of different rules that were had different declarations that were conflicting with each other, and the last one won out. Well, here we're seeing a variation on that. There actually are two different rules, and one of them set the padding to 10 pixels, but one that was more specific because it had this media query actually set the padding to 0. So you have this portal into all the CSS that could possibly be affecting this H2. And you can see which one's winning out because maybe in this instance you really did want this one that has a line through it to be the one that wins out. And so you might have to adjust how you wrote your selector to make that true. Now, how do you know where all these rules are coming from? Well, next to each one of them, on the right-hand side, next to the selector, is the name of the file that it came from. Or if it's an inline style, I think it says it's an inline style. Um, but as you hover over this, you'll see that this came from the mmcc.css file, and it has this colon and then a number. That's the line number in the file. So it's 1,884. So on line 1,884 is the CSS rule that we wrote that is affecting the padding and margin of this H2.
So is this a regular thing for your debugging as well? If something's not working out the way you anticipate, do you generally look at the code in something like Atom, or are you looking at it in the web inspector so that is it easier for you to find bugs and unexpected results using this tool?
There are definitely times where using Atom helps because if you had a typo, the color coding or the color syntax highlighting in Atom is going to point out where that bug might be pretty fast. But what you said about using this tool is right as well. That this is the truth. This is what the browser is showing me. And if I can't figure out why it's not behaving the way my brain expects, I can use this tool to see, oh, it's because there's more than one CSS rule and I'm writing this in the wrong area, or maybe I need to be more specific with my styling, or there are times when the rule that I've written doesn't even show up here and it turns out I was editing the wrong file in the wrong folder or something like that. And this is just my sanity check to see if the CSS I'm writing is actually getting applied to anything on the page.
So it's not really an either or. You've got all those tools in your arsenal, and um,
Yeah, I do. I would say that the web inspector is probably more helpful with CSS than anything else. Because there really was no tool for me before to go into some other website and look at their CSS and how it was written, because the CSS file was 1,000 lines or 2,000 lines long, and I couldn't understand which pieces of it were being used. So if I want to see all the CSS that's affecting just this one piece of the page, this kind of laser focuses on just that CSS.
and like on a site like this, it could get really complicated, and this is going to really allow you to narrowly focus on the lines of code that are listed there.
Absolutely. Now you can click on any one of, you notice how these file names are underlined. You can click on any one of these and it'll take you out of this elements tab and jump you into the line of the CSS that was written. That can be pretty valuable to be able to see what had been written and see above and below it. But sometimes this is just enough to be able to see the list. Now, if you keep scrolling down, you'll see that some of these aren't even coming from the mmcc.css. Some of these are coming from bootstrap.css, which is the name of a library that we use to provide some of our layout. So our styles generally override all of the bootstrap CSS, and you can see that because all the lines through the code are there. If I keep scrolling down further, there's some of these that come from the user agent style sheet. I think we talked about that, how every browser typically lets you set like a minimum font size, and that's added through the user agent style sheet. And this shows you exactly where every potential style came from, even the baseline, the ones that ship with the browsers. and it shows everything that's inherited. Now there's another way to look at this. Maybe this is too much to go through. Maybe you just want to know what is the color of that text. Well, that's where this computed tab comes into play. At the top, it gives you a breakdown of any margin, border, or padding, the box model that's been applied to this particular element that you have selected. That's pretty cool if you want to see how wide or tall something is or how much padding and margin it has. But if you scroll down just a little bit further, these are all the CSS properties that have been customized for this H2. So I can see, oh, the color, that's this RGBA 5151 51, it looks like. And if I click on this and I open the tab, it actually shows me all the different possible colors that were in the running. The ones that were overridden have the strike through them. And then the one that wins out is on the very top. There's a filter here, so if you know you're just interested in like the font stuff, you can type in font, and then font family, font size, and font weight are shown here. These are the calculated values. And if someone didn't actually set a font size and you want to know what the value is because it's the default one, you can click show all, and these are all the possible CSS properties that Chrome version like 73, whichever version I have installed here, these are all the CSS properties that it knows of. So if you're looking for a way to customize something, you can actually use the web inspector to get a list of all the valid CSS properties. So this might be how you learn about what font kerning does, or font stretch, or font style, or font weight. Like these are all the possibilities. If I uncheck this, it's going to only show the ones that the web designer has tweaked for what I have selected. Super powerful. Now I have to double check that I've talked about everything that I meant to. Let me pull up our slides again and bring our video back. So we talked about how multiple style sheets or inline styles or embedded styles can be included. The web inspector lets you see where all styles are coming from. And it shows you how the web browser is interpreting the cascade just by going through that list. You can see which ones win out. That's what the strike throughs indicate. All the losers get the line through them. Where the rule's coming from, that was the file name that was shown next to the selector. And the way that you can see the final set of values that are applied to the thing that you have selected is to go to that computed tab. So your homework for this section here is to look at that same hyperlink. I used the math link, and tell us what styles are affecting the link that you've been inspecting. Where do they come from? And so for my example, I said that the math lab link has color, positioning, and a couple other things that come from the tile section of mmcc.css, but some of the spacing and font styles are inherited from bootstrap.css. So that's activity 4. Activity 5, spoiler, is a lot like how we edited the DOM. The web inspector is great at showing you that CSS, but holy cow, you can change any of that CSS. This can go crazy. I told you that we had those colors like cyan, eggplant. Let's say someone has disagreed with Brandon's selection for what eggplant is colored. You can come in, you can select this tile that has the class of eggplant. And if I search in the CSS, which I should probably hide our video again, Anthony. If I search through here, here's the background color specified by eggplant. It's 260D34. What does that color code mean? We'll find out next week, Anthony. But if I click on the little box of color, it's a preview of the color. It brings up this color picker. I can actually just drag my cursor around and find a different purple that maybe says more eggplant to you. And then I click away, and it's actually updated that style. So any of my other tiles that use that color, which I guess there's only one, but let's really quickly edit this other tile to use eggplant as well. Now I have 2 different tiles that have that eggplant color. And I've changed the definition of what that eggplant color is, just like that. You can edit anything. You can edit any value. So if you see a number value, one of my favorite things is to crank that number up and down. What happens if instead of 224 pixels, each of our tiles is 500 pixels? it definitely changes what that page feels like. But maybe we like that. Maybe we're going to be displaying more links. And so we need a wider width on each of those tiles. You'll see that there's a lot of things that need to be updated for this to work. As I hover over, the boxes that appear don't make any sense. But this is the way that you can start making tweaks to your CSS rules. Maybe 500 is too big. Let's make them smaller. Maybe they're 100 pixels. How does that look? Oh, that doesn't look good. Maybe I want to increase the space in between them. I can go crazy. I can add margins and paddings. I can edit any value that's here, or I can uncheck a value, and it's like that width wasn't even specified. If I disable it, now every box is the width of its content, which is even more chaotic than it was before. So you can uncheck to disable or check to enable a rule. If something isn't in the list and you want to add it, like what's a good example? Height is already in here. Padding. There's no padding in here for some reason. What if I wanted padding on this box? If I add a padding of 20 pixels, what happens? Well, it's starting to look really terrible, first of all, but I added the space in between the border and the text all around it. Maybe that's not enough, but I like to crank it to an extreme and then lower it back down, or even go to negative values or 0 values just to see what it's like if I remove a certain property. One thing that I like to point out is when you're editing the rules on the right here, you're actually editing the CSS rule. It applies to everything on the page that has that class or that ID. What if you just wanted to change the color of a single tile? Well, you can actually use this element.style option here. This is going to let you edit the inline styles that are applied to that element. So you could actually just specify a background color here. And I chose Rebecca Purple by accident. I want red. And now I've changed just the advising and mentoring tile to have a background color of red. And you can actually see what it did over here on the left-hand side in the Elements tab. It's added a style attribute and written background color red in here, just like the inline styles that you wrote in the CSS 3 Ways challenge.
Ooh. My heart is open to that red.
It's going to make your eyes bleed eventually if we have too many tiles like that. This is all real time. I was making those changes and my computer was showing them in real time. When I edited one rule, it showed all the elements with that change right away. I use this to understand CSS properties and what they do. The same type of autocomplete options are generally available in the Web Inspector, just like they are in Atom. So your homework here is to change your web page, change the CSS, and describe what you did. So you saw me change the margin, changing some color values, and you just need to describe the results of that. How are you feeling about our web page, Anthony?
It's different. It's different than what it was before.
I think we're learning about it along the way too. We see what properties are involved.
I feel like there was some whiskey involved in this. So it's good that you could just refresh it.
Let's do that. Let's put it back to normal. I've ruined it enough.
Well, it shows the contrast of everything you've done with the original too.
I'll show you something that has been bugging me. This button needs to have white text in it. It's not high enough contrast. So I'm going to come in here and just change that color. Oops. Where'd it go? Change that color to white. There, the Harrison Campus renovation updates is the color it should be. White text on a dark blue background. Much better. Okay, so if you've been following along, we have looked at HTML, looked at the DOM, looked at the CSS, and we've edited all aspects of that. Pretty powerful. More than you can do with Atom. You can do this on any web page you visit. But the Web Inspector has more to offer. I want to show you one more aspect of how you can use it this semester, and that's to write some JavaScript. You've written a lot of HTML and CSS, and the Elements tab is going to be your main focus. But if you go over to this Console tab, this is a place where you can write JavaScript code that interacts with the web page that you're looking at. So let's move on to activity 6, and this is the last one, about how you can write JavaScript in what I have labeled a REPL environment. What is a REPL environment? Well, let's write some JavaScript, and you can follow along here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. We're going to write some JavaScript that you've probably seen happen to you at least once, and it's kind of annoying. We're going to write an alert box. So I'm going to start typing alert, which is a function, and I have to send it a message to display. So the way that you send a message to a function is inside of these parentheses. And what I'm sending is actually some words, so that's considered a string. If you've done computer programming, you're probably used to these double quotation marks. It's a lot like in HTML how you have those attributes and you surround the value of an attribute with double quotation marks. So I've written alert, and then in the parentheses within the quotation marks, I'm going to write hello world. And the last thing I'm going to put is a semicolon because, like CSS, every line inside of JavaScript ends with a semicolon. If I hit enter, you're going to get a pop-up like I have up here that says hello world. You've made your first pop-up. You can make some money with that.
Why is that we're using hello world for people that haven't used hello world?
I don't know where it came from, Anthony. I just know that it's the first thing I write when I'm trying something new. I think it's what the first programmers did. I don't know.
It's really old. It's really old.
What's older, Hello World or Lorem Ipsum? I don't know.
Hello World's older, for sure.
No, Lorem Ipsum was way back in like the typesetting days. Like it was before computers.
Was it?
Are you gonna tell me that like Hello World came from an abacus or something? Like,
yeah, you're right. 72 it says.
Sweet. I hope Lorem Ipsum came from before computers. I might be wrong. So if you hit OK on that pop-up blocker, you'll see that the JavaScript console returns the word undefined, and then you've got this little flashing cursor again for you to type. So when I use the word REPL, that actually stands for read, evaluate, print, loop. So what this console actually let us do is type a command for the computer. We typed alert hello world. That's the command. We hit enter. And what the browser did is it read the command. It evaluated it. It printed the result, which unfortunately was undefined, or I guess, it technically printed a pop-up box, right? That counts. And then it looped. It realized it was done evaluating, and it came back to where it was waiting for the next command. So a REPL is a really cool programming tool that lets you type code and see what the result is. And JavaScript, which is the language that runs the web, that runs everything you probably use today. I'm sure your new refrigerators and your coffee pots, your Keurigs, I bet everything has JavaScript in it at some point in its stack. This browser lets you type JavaScript code and see the result. So the first thing that I want you to do is pop up a message, but maybe you want to do some other type of commands. I always like to use this as a little calculator. So if you wanted to type 1 + 1, and hit enter, you'll get the read, evaluate, print loop. It's going to read 1 + 1. It's going to evaluate it to 2. It's going to print out the result. It printed out 2. And then it's going to loop, waiting for the next command. Maybe I want to do 1 + 2 instead. What I like is that it actually gives you a preview of the value before you even hit enter, which is just kind of crazy. It helps you as you're typing to make sure you're typing the right thing. So it's like a REPL that does it twice, as you're typing and then when you hit enter. So you can do any sort of math in here. There's lots of commands. What I think is particularly relevant to this exercise is we can use JavaScript to interact with the DOM. That's that API that we were talking about, the programming interface. JavaScript is the way that you can manipulate the DOM. And to prove that to you, we're going to ask a question of the DOM. So the JavaScript code for doing that involves typing the word document. That's the way that you get access to the DOM, is document. And then when you want to run a command on it, you type a period. So it's document dot. And now the thing that we're going to look for is get element. And as you start typing, it auto-completes. The one that I want is get elements by class name. No, sorry, get elements by tag name. There we go. Hit tab as you're typing that. It's get elements by tag name. And I want to ask how many hyperlinks we have on the page. Remember, hyperlink tag is the A tag, the anchor tag. I'm passing the parentheses and the double quotation marks and then just the A inside of there to this function. We're asking the document object model how many anchor tags are in there. Look through all of the DOM from top parent to the great 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 grandchildren. Find all of the anchor tags and return them for me. And if I hit enter, you'll see that it actually returns every single anchor tag on the page. A little preview of what it looks like. If you open up this little arrow here, you'll see that it gave you all of them returned in groups of 100. And the actual size, it's hard to see. It says it right here. It's an HTML collection of 170. That means that there are 170 anchor tags. But there's actually a way to get that number and not return any of the other crud. I'm going to hit the up arrow to save some time. I don't have to retype it. I can actually just go up and down through the history here. I'm going to add one more function at the end of this to get the length. So I'll type length, and when I hit enter, it just gives me that 170. So my web page has 170 anchor tags on it. If you're following along in the chat room, hopefully someone's out there. Can you try looking at your web page? Tell me how many hyperlinks your page has. We'll see who wins. I think the next step is to see how many div tags you have. I had a student who asked why we have so many div tags. It's just a tag that we have to group content together. So oftentimes you'll have more divs on a web page than any other tag. On this current student's page, there's only 163. I kind of bet some of your other pages will have more divs than that. But you've just written some JavaScript. Now, the sample code that I have in the slides or in the document, I specifically wrote it in such a way that you can't copy and paste. I didn't use the write something. You'll actually need to type it there with your own quotation marks to get it to work. So see if you can figure out how many links and div tags there are on your web page.
You disabled copy paste?
I didn't disable copy paste. I wrote it in such a way that it was invalid.
Oh, that's cold.
But it looks right. I'm very cold, man. The only way to learn is to type it yourself. It has autocomplete too. I mean, come on. You just hit tab. Oh wow, we got a lot of people in the chat room. Hopefully one of them is going to tell us how many links they have. I wonder if the chat room's not working. Because I see people watching, but I don't see their...
Well, let me do a test.
No, that worked. Crickets in the chat room then from everyone else. I'll try to recap this. So we have taken a whirlwind tour through the web inspector, from how I like to open it, how I like to look through HTML and the DOM, how you can edit that, how you can look at the CSS, how you can edit the CSS, and then even do JavaScripty things. The web inspector is way more powerful than that. I'm still probably only scratching the surface of what it can do, but it is a tool that is worth playing around with. I don't think that you want your first interaction with the web inspector to be when you're troubleshooting something that's broken. I think you'll have a more positive relationship if you use the web inspector to go look at something that you're really impressed by and start seeing how it works. Maybe start picking apart, change some of the HTML or change some of the CSS to see if you can break it, and then if you can fix it. Maybe make the thing that you like do something that it wasn't meant to do before. And it's completely safe. You hit refresh and the web page is back to where it was. I really encourage you to do this. And so that's why we have this first assignment where you can go through and see what everyone else has done. And then there's a second assignment where you record a video of yourself or you make screenshots of yourself using the web inspector on a different site. I really want you to use this as a tool to check your own work and to learn. After this web design class, there are so many CSS properties and so many things that we won't even have talked about, but you can go learn about them when you need to by using the web inspector. And things are still changing. If you want to find out how animation is working, or a new tag or a new CSS property that gets added to a browser, the web inspector is going to be there for you. In a couple years, it's going to become even cooler and more powerful. And I view the web inspector as teaching you how to fish, so to speak. Um, it's how I am able to learn things for this class and for my job. And if there's anything that you take away from Web Design 1, it should be the web inspector. Have I convinced you, Anthony?
Yeah, yeah, that's good advice. This love you have for the web inspector is probably going to catch on after people give it a shot.
I hope so. And if you look on YouTube, there are people that actually work on the web inspectors and help build them. And I have some of their videos in Web Design 2 because their passion for the web inspector is what makes me so excited about it. Because this is how everyone learned to build websites. It was by finding something that they thought was cool, figuring out how it works. And you don't have to memorize all the code to do that. You just need to pick it apart. And that's what I love about the web inspector. So I don't think there's any other questions in the chat room. I did have questions submitted ahead of time, in particular about the CSS visualization challenge. Let me pull that up onto our screen. This is the type of Google Doc where you're not allowed to write in it. The only thing you can do is make a copy of it, and that's underneath the file, make a copy. When you have that copy, make sure you put your name in it. You're going to want to share it with Anthony and me, and then you'll actually want to use the share button. And actually, Anthony, did you see the share button is yellow now in Google? It changed for me today.
Oh.
And the fonts are subtly different. I'm going to have to use the web inspector to see what they changed it to.
And I shared something earlier today, and it was not yellow.
I had it up on 2 different computers, and one of them was yellow and one of them wasn't. I don't know when it's all going to be the same, but it's crazy.
So some kind of rollout they're doing then.
Make sure that you turn on sharing and copy the link from this screen so that when you submit it in Moodle, Anthony and I can access it when we're grading. There were some things that were submitted that you probably got an email from one of us asking for permission to see your document. You need to make sure that anyone at Mid can access your document. They can't change it. It's view by default, but we need that in order to grade your submission. So then you put your name in it. You probably want to change the title of the document to have your name. There are instructions on the slide here. What this visualization challenge is having you do is a lot like what the HTML troubleshooting activity had you do, except I promise you I've tried not to make any errors in the CSS. I have written valid CSS and I have written valid HTML. Your challenge this time is to play the role of the browser and try to pretend to render that page in your head and tell us what it would look like. And so what you're asked to do in the speaker notes at the bottom of the slides is to say, what is the CSS trying to do? Just describe it in words. Tell us what type of selector is being used, and those are either element or class or ID or descendant selectors or pseudo selectors or even group selectors. We're going to look at a couple examples to help you with that right now. And then describe what the page is going to look like. And if you really can't visualize that right now, there is nothing stopping you from taking the sample CSS or the sample HTML and making a quick page. From that CSS 3 Ways challenge, you know you can build a single web page that has CSS in the style tags, and then you just need to make sure that the HTML that you write is going to be targeted by the CSS that we've given you. So I know that I specifically had a couple questions about slide 10. Nope, it was slide 11. Confusingly, slide 11, but CSS number 8. So let's take a look at this together, Anthony, see if we can determine what this might look like. The CSS selector, the thing that comes before the curly braces, says body. So what do you think that is trying to select, Anthony?
Well, it's probably the body tag.
Yeah, it's the one and only, the body, the thing that contains all the content on the web page is visible. I like that you use the word tag. That means that this is an HTML element. So one of the things that we've asked you to identify is what type of selector it is. this is considered an element selector because it's just the name of a tag. Now, if we want to know what this is going to look like, we can take a look through these declarations, and I see the font is being set to a couple values, the line height is being changed, color is being changed, background is being changed, margin and padding have been turned to 0. So let's unpack a few things that I think are important to have in our mind. There is a color property and a background property in CSS, and I to this day will still sometimes type one when I mean the other. Color affects the text. That's the foreground color. So that any of the text that's in the body by default is going to be this 555753. Next week, Anthony is going to help us learn what that color might be, but for today, you could just copy that hex value, paste it into Google, and they're going to tell you exactly what color that is.
It's going to be a gray.
Google showing it, yeah, in the green spectrum, but it is pretty gray, yep. And then the background is 3 Fs. Oh, that brought up a music video. Let's try typing it with 6 Fs. There we go. With 6 Fs, it comes back as white. But then this background property also has a URL, which seems to be pointing to blossoms.jpg, which seems to be maybe an image, I'm guessing. Has the words no repeat bottom right on there, and they have to do with the background. The font was being set to 75%, Georgia, sans serif. If we just look at these, like you can actually Google these. I think the CSS tag database from last week is actually really helpful for this. All of your peers added a CSS property. I know that I saw some of these in there. I know background color and color were there, and I'm sure font was too. These, as you try to piece them out, are going to be setting font size and the font, some colors, and the image is going to show up here. These words at the end, no repeat bottom right, kind of describe where it's going to be positioned on the page. And then the margin and padding, this is kind of subtle here, but they typically have a value on the body because you don't want the text touching the border of the web page. But what we're doing here is explicitly setting them to 0. So there's not going to be any spacing on the outside. You're just going to see this image, and it's going to set the text to be a gray color, and it's going to be this Georgia font, which if you've never seen the Georgia font before, let's see if it's in the Google drop-down menu here. It is right here. So it's this serif font here, which is funny because the fallback font is a sans serif font. That's kind of funny. But that's what you need to write down here in the bottom is that there's an element selector. It's adding a background image and removing margin and padding, and the color, the text is going to be this color against a background that's this color. That's generally what we're doing with 11 here. And you could actually code this up. You could make a web page with this. Let's see if my computer will cooperate here. I'll grab this body selector, go to Atom. We'll put it in HTML mode. I'll type that HTML tag. I'm going to create the style tag in the head here, paste in that CSS. And I'm going to just put H1 in here, and we learned about Hello World today. So let's type that in here. Save it. I'm just going to put this on my desktop, and we'll call it css8.html. And when I open that page up, well, it's got the Georgia font and the gray text, but it doesn't have my image because we don't have blossoms.jpg.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now someone might think that I'm trying to catch you on this here. I'm not pretending that there's no file, so it's just white. Like I think it would be safe for you to say that it'll show a picture of a flower. You can pretend that you have a blossoms.jpg file. So that's how I would answer CSS number 8. CSS number 9 is a bit more special. It looks like it's all selecting these A tags. A:*link is one of the selectors, and then it has some font, text decoration, and color specified, and then A:*visited is another selector, and then there's a selector that actually has A colon hover, A colon focus, A colon active, and they're separated by commas. Let's go through these in reverse order. This last one here has commas in it, and in our textbook chapter, when it talks about selectors, one of the types is a group selector. You can actually say that you want to set multiple things to have a color like 9685BA or to have a text decoration of underline. If you wanted to select multiple things, you write the selectors that you want, but you separate them by commas, and that means that I want these things and these things and these things to all have an underline. So the comma represents a group selector. Now this colon hover is really weird. You can guess that this A represents the link tag, the hyperlink tag. But the colon is actually a special selector, and I can't remember what page it is that there's this table of selectors, but I'll tell you it's the pseudo selector. Pseudo with a P, P-S-E-U-D-O. This type of selector asks for links that are in a certain state or that have this special property to them. So at first, this A colon link is saying, I want all of the hyperlinks in their default value to be have this styling. But then this other selector right after it that we know will override the other one because it comes afterwards is going to select any hyperlink that's in the visited state. You've probably seen it on a web page. If you click on a link and you come to that web page in the future, it's no longer blue. It might be purple. Does that ring a bell, Anthony?
Yeah. Is that browser has visited that page some point in the past, or?
Yeah, it's typically whatever your browser setting is. If you use something like Chrome, it might sync between all your computers or between your iPhone and your iPad and stuff like that. But it's typically, if the web page is in your history, your browser history, then it's going to be considered in a visited state.
So if we clear our history, then that would reset the visited state, and then that would not show up.
Yeah, it would fall back to this normal link state. Then there's this last selector here of A colon hover, A colon focus, A colon active. So we're selecting three different things. We're selecting links in three different pseudo states. When you're hovering over them with, your finger, let's see if I can do the finger icon or gesture here. Does this look like the hand to you, Anthony?
Look like the hand.
The hand that's hovering over a link.
Oh.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did I get
it? Yeah, I didn't know what you were doing. Yeah.
You probably didn't have Skype open. I'm sorry. I should have told you. All right. Anyways, when you're hovering over something, you get that special hand cursor. Well, you've probably seen how links will change background colors or add an underline. That's how this is done. Focus is a little bit different. If you're using a keyboard to navigate and tab from link to link, that's a different state entirely, but oftentimes we want that to appear the same as if you're hovering over it. And then active is actually a special state that a link has when it's being clicked. So as you're pressing down on it, that's what it's going to look like. So links have so many different states that you want to give a different style to that we had to create the pseudo selector, and that is the colon here. So this is probably the most tricky example in the slides here because we have pseudo selectors, we have group selectors. And what's interesting is all of these probably do come into play for any link on a page. So you want to make sure that this A colon link provides the baseline styles. Like it probably has the font family, the font size. And then on visited and hover, you probably don't want to re-specify everything that's the same. You only want to specify what's different about them. So in visited or hover, you might just change the color, or you might just change the background color or something like that. Because this A colon link is still going to apply to that link. It's just this additional styling of visited, hover, or focus will be added on top. So I talked about what types of selectors were in there, the pseudo and the group. The last thing that you just need to describe is what this is going to look like. You can tell that there's some decoration going on of underlining or no underlining. You can tell that there's colors in here. You could look up what those colors are and describe how it'll look like this by default. But if you've already seen this page before, then it'll be this color. And if you're hovering over it or clicking on it, it's going to be this color. I'll leave that up to you. And then the very last one, slide 13, is the trickiest selector of them all. It's the descendant selector. A descendant selector is actually just any combination of selectors. Notice how there's no comma in here. There's a space in between this dot summary and this paragraph, this P. A descendant selector is the true power of CSS, because you can actually say, I don't want just this one thing. I want this one thing that's only underneath this other thing. So instead of casting this broad net and grabbing all the hyperlinks, you can actually say, actually, I just want the hyperlinks that are underneath the nav tag. Because that's pretty common. In a nav bar, you have links, right? But you probably have links in your article on the web page too. You probably want the links in the nav bar to look different than the links in your article or your blog post. So that's why CSS added the concept of descendant selectors. You can combine the other selectors, the nav selector and the anchor tag selector, separate them by a space, and now you're actually just laser focusing on the anchor tags that are underneath the nav tag. So with that explanation in mind, this is selecting the paragraphs that are underneath something with a class of summary. So if we take a look at the sample HTML, it's a little small on here, but you'll see that there's this div that has a class of summary, and then there's these paragraphs underneath it inside of that div. So there's not a lot to this. You can see that the only properties that are being changed are the alignment to center, and it's changing the font to Georgia and making it italic. So you could say that this is a descendant selector that is centering the paragraphs that are inside of this div. Now what's cool is if there was another div outside of here that had paragraphs in it that did not have a class of summary, they would be untouched. They would not be captured by this descendant selector, and they would be left at whatever their font was and not even centered. So I appreciate the questions from before. I hope we've done a good job of explaining those slides. Those are the variety of selectors that you'll get to be working with in the coming weeks. What do you think, Anthony?
That's good.
What are there any selectors that trip you up that you have any advice on?
Not that I can think of.
The pseudo selectors look complicated, but when you think about how you use a web page and you hover over things, it just becomes like any other selector. The one that I think just trips people up is either commas when you're doing a group selector or spaces when you're doing a descendant selector, because people can't think of why they would need to select things underneath other things, but it's really pretty common on any web page that you're looking at, and you can tell that by going into the web inspector. Let's wrap it all together. You can use the web inspector to see these in action. If I bounce back over to the current students page, every one of, come on computer, you can do it, every one of these tiles Oh, I hit too many buttons. Every one of the tiles took advantage of descendant selectors. And my text is too big to let you see this. If I look at that H2 again, no, not the H2, the advising and mentoring. What is that, an H3? Nope, it's an H2. So this advising and mentoring H2 is inside of a link. In order for us to set the color of this to white, I had to write this crazy oh, our faces are in the way. I had to write this descendant selector that selected our section called tiles and then found the tile inside, any of the tiles inside of it, found the H2s, and then what it's actually selecting is the anchor tags, the links underneath those H2s, and it's changing their color to white. If this rule wasn't here, that text color would probably not have been white. It probably would have defaulted to the dark black. And so we actually wanted the link to be white, and so I had to write this descendant selector to target it. So I think the descendant selectors are probably the hardest thing to wrap your head around, but they're definitely the most powerful and probably the most important to master. So this is our longest stream yet at about an hour and 40 minutes. I don't want to keep anyone too much longer. Thank you for everyone that's tuning in the chat room here.
Appreciate it. One more night.
If you have more questions about this exercise or the web inspector, that's what Slack is for. You can ask everyone in the class or you can contact one of us individually. But we are here to help, and we hope you love the web inspector. It's seriously the best. So I got nothing else. You want to say goodbye, Anthony?
I'm out of goodbyes, but I'll see you all next time.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.